I told you 3 times this pour had to be finished before sunrise. Now we are hours behind, and my client is breathing down my neck because of you. You think this is a joke? You think I can sign off on this mess? Look at me when I'm talking to you.
I'm looking at you, sir. The crew...
One pointed finger, one racist slur shouted across a construction site, and one engineer who had no idea the man he was humiliating wasn't just another worker. He was the one person who could end his career with a single word. Marcus Thompson had spent 15 years climbing from day laborer to silent partner and project owner. He'd worked every position on a construction site, earned every certification, and invested every dollar he'd saved. But on this morning, wearing a dusty t-shirt and blue hard hat instead of his usual office attire, no one recognized him, especially not Richard Bentley, the newly hired lead engineer who saw only skin color and assumed authority. What happened next wasn't just about one man's humiliation. It was about a reckoning that had been building for decades.
Marcus Thompson's day started the way it always did, at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before his alarm. He'd learned years ago that the construction business didn't wait for anyone, especially not a black man trying to prove he belonged in rooms where people looked surprised to see him. The coffee maker gurgled in his downtown Chicago apartment as he reviewed the day's schedule on his tablet. The Riverside Commercial Complex project was entering its critical phase. 16 months of planning, $47 million in financing, and his entire reputation rode on this development. As the majority stakeholder and co-owner of Thompson-Vasquez Construction, he'd personally overseen every decision, every hire, every beam placement. But today was different. Marcus had received 3 complaints in the past week about workplace culture on the site, anonymous messages through the company hotline, workers reporting uncomfortable situations and discriminatory comments from someone in management. The reports were vague, careful, the kind of complaints that came from people afraid of losing their jobs. So Marcus made a decision that morning. He wouldn't arrive in his Mercedes wearing a tailored suit. He wouldn't walk onto the site as Mr. Thompson, the owner. He'd blend in, watch, listen, see what really happened when no one thought the boss was watching. He pulled on an old University of Illinois t-shirt, faded from a dozen years of weekend projects, steel-toed boots that had walked 1,000 job sites, a blue hard hat without any company logo. In the mirror, he looked exactly like what he'd been 15 years ago, another construction worker hoping to make it through the day without injury or insult. The Riverside site sprawled across 4 city blocks, a skeleton of steel and concrete that would eventually become luxury condos, retail space, and offices. Marcus arrived at 6:30 a.m., parking his truck 3 blocks away and walking to the site entrance. The security guard, someone he'd hired personally, gave him a standard nod, barely glancing at his temporary site badge that identified him only as M. Thompson, General Labor. Perfect. The morning crew was already gathering. Marcus recognized most of them. Carlos, the master electrician who'd worked with him on 5 projects. Jennifer, the crane operator who could thread a beam through a 6-inch gap. Dozens of skilled workers who'd helped build Thompson-Vasquez's reputation as one of the best construction firms in the Midwest. But there were new faces, too. The company had expanded rapidly in the past year, hiring new engineers and managers to handle multiple projects simultaneously. Marcus's business partner, Roberto Vasquez, had handled most of the recent hiring, while Marcus focused on financing and client relations. That's when he heard the voice. "Listen up, people. We're already behind schedule, and I'm not taking excuses today." Richard Bentley strode into the staging area like he owned the place. Mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, expensive hard hat that looked like it had never touched actual dirt. He'd been hired 6 weeks ago as lead structural engineer after impressive credentials from 3 major firms in Dallas, Atlanta, and Boston. On paper, Bentley was exactly what they needed: experienced, credentialed, connected. But Marcus noticed something in the morning briefing. The way Bentley's eyes skipped over certain workers, the slight edge in his voice when addressing the Latino framers, the impatient hand gesture toward the black electricians. Nothing overt, nothing you could quite name, but Marcus had spent 42 years reading those subtle signs, the micro-behaviors that revealed what people really thought when they believed no one important was watching. "You there," Bentley pointed at Marcus, who stood near the back of the crowd. "You're on debris detail. I want the north section cleared by 1000 hours. Think you can handle that?" Marcus met his eyes. "I'm actually scheduled for—" "I don't care what your schedule says. I'm the lead engineer, and I'm telling you what you're doing today." Several workers shifted uncomfortably. Carlos caught Marcus's eye, recognition flickering across his face. But Marcus gave the slightest shake of his head. "Not yet." "Understood," Marcus said quietly, picking up a shovel. He had all the evidence he needed, but he wanted to see exactly how far Richard Bentley would go.
The morning sun climbed higher, turning the construction site into a griddle of concrete and steel. Marcus worked steadily, clearing debris, watching, documenting everything with a kind of attention that had made him successful in business. Every interaction, every command, every casual comment that revealed the rot beneath the surface. By 9:15 a.m., he'd witnessed Bentley bark orders at 3 different workers of color while addressing white employees with courtesy that bordered on deference. The pattern was unmistakable. "Hey, can someone check the load calculations on column J17? Jennifer called from her crane operator booth. "The numbers on this manifest don't match the structural plans." Marcus walked over, climbing the access ladder to review the paperwork. He'd personally approved those calculations 2 weeks ago. One glance told him the problem. Someone had modified the load requirements without authorization, creating a potentially dangerous situation. "This is wrong," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the site. "Those calculations are off by at least 15%. If we load that column according to these numbers—" "Who the hell asked for your opinion?" Bentley's voice cut through the morning air like a saw blade. He strode toward the crane, face flushed with anger. "You're a debris worker. You don't even look at engineering documents. You understand me?" Marcus climbed down from the ladder slowly, deliberately. Around them, work had stopped. 20 pairs of eyes watched the confrontation unfold. "Sir, I'm just saying those calculations look— I don't care what they look like." Bentley snatched the papers from Marcus's hands. "You know what your problem is? People like you always think you know better than the people who actually went to college, who actually earned their credentials. You show up with a strong back, and suddenly you're trying to do engineer's work." The words hung in the air. "People like you." Carlos stepped forward. "Hey, Richard, maybe we should just double-check." "Stay out of this, Carlos." Bentley didn't even look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Marcus with the kind of contempt that couldn't be hidden anymore. "I am sick and tired of workers on this site questioning my authority. I've built projects in 3 states. I've got credentials from MIT, and I'm not going to stand here and be second-guessed by someone who probably never made it past high school." Marcus felt the familiar burn in his chest. Not anger. He'd learned long ago that anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. This was something deeper, the accumulated weight of 1,000 similar moments. Every time someone assumed he was less qualified, less intelligent, less worthy simply because of the color of his skin. "I actually have a degree in civil engineering from— I don't care." Bentley moved closer, invading Marcus's space in that aggressive way that dared him to respond physically. "You know what I think? I think you're exactly what's wrong with these diversity hire programs. Companies forced to fill quotas, bringing in people who aren't qualified, who don't have the background, That's enough. Jennifer's voice cut from above. Richard, you're out of line. I'll tell you when I'm out of line. Bentley spun toward her, then back to Marcus. You know what? You're off this project. I want you off this site. You're fired. The words echoed across the construction site. Marcus stood perfectly still. This was the moment, the point where he could reveal himself, end this humiliation, put Richard Bentley in his place with 4 simple words: I own this company. But something stopped him, because this wasn't just about him anymore. If Bentley felt comfortable firing a worker just like that, without cause, without due process, what else had he done? How many other workers had faced this kind of abuse? You can't fire him. Carlos stepped forward, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. You don't have that authority. I'm the lead engineer on this project. I have exactly that authority. No. Jennifer climbed down from her crane, removing her gloves deliberately. You don't. Project managers handle hiring and firing. Engineers handle engineering. And even if you could fire someone, you can't do it without cause, without documentation, without... I don't need a lecture on labor law from a crane operator. Bentley pulled out his phone. I'm calling security to have him escorted off the property, and anyone who has a problem with that can join him. The threat silenced the gathering crowd. Marcus watched faces turn away, workers returning reluctantly to their tasks. He understood. They had families, mortgages, bills. They couldn't afford to lose their jobs over someone else's fight, even if that fight was righteous. Marcus picked up his shovel. I'll clear my area and go. Damn right you will. Bentley's voice dripped with satisfaction, the pleasure of someone who'd just proven they could wield power without consequences. And maybe this'll teach you something about knowing your place. Knowing your place. Marcus had heard those words before. Different contexts, different decades, but always the same essential message. Stay in your lane. Don't reach above your station. Accept your role in the hierarchy we've created. He walked toward the north section, Bentley's eyes burning into his back. But as he moved, he passed Carlos, past Jennifer, past a dozen other workers who made brief eye contact. And in those glances, he saw something that made him adjust his plans. These people deserved better. They deserved to see that standing up to injustice wasn't career suicide. They deserved to know that the system could work, that bad actors could face consequences, that courage wasn't always punished. Marcus picked up his shovel, typed a quick message to Roberto. Emergency. Need you on site. Bring the full management team. We have a situation. The response came back immediately. On my way. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Marcus could last 15 more minutes. He resumed clearing debris, but now he positioned himself where he could watch Bentley. The engineer had returned to his inspection rounds, confidence restored, barking orders with renewed vigor. Marcus observed him berate a young Latino worker for a minor error, saw him dismiss a legitimate safety concern from a black foreman, watched him operate with the impunity of someone who'd never faced real consequences. At 10:07 a.m., 3 vehicles pulled into the construction site. Marcus recognized them immediately. Roberto's Range Rover, the HR director's sedan, and the legal counsel's SUV. Showtime. Roberto emerged first, his expression carefully neutral as he scanned the site. He spotted Marcus immediately, 30 years of friendship allowing silent communication, a slight nod, an acknowledgement. Richard Bentley? Roberto's voice carried authority as he approached the engineer. I'm Roberto Vasquez, co-owner of Thompson-Vasquez Construction. We need to talk about some complaints we've received. Is it? Roberto's eyes traveled across the gathered workers, landing briefly on Marcus. Because what I'm hearing suggests otherwise.
I'm sorry, but I don't know what you've heard.
Bentley's voice carried the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to talking their way out of problems. "I run a tight ship. If anyone has complaints, they probably don't appreciate the high standards I bring to—" "You just fired someone," Roberto interrupted, "without cause, without proper procedure, in front of the entire crew." Bentley glanced toward where Marcus stood, his expression flickering between dismissal and irritation. That worker was insubordinate. He was interfering with engineering decisions he had no business. "His name is Marcus Thompson." Roberto's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "And I think you should know exactly who you just fired." The color drained from Bentley's face as Marcus stepped forward, removing his blue hard hat. Around them, the construction site had gone completely silent. Workers emerged from behind equipment, descended from scaffolding, gathered in a widening circle. Marcus walked slowly toward Bentley, each step measured. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the site. "I'm Marcus Thompson. I co-founded this company 16 years ago with Roberto. I personally designed the structural systems for this building. I approved every engineering plan, every safety protocol, every hiring decision, including yours. I own this site, and I've spent the past 4 hours watching you reveal exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching." Bentley's mouth opened and closed. His hand gripped his hard hat so tightly his knuckles turned white. I didn't know. You should have identified yourself as what? As someone who deserved basic respect? As someone whose experience and knowledge mattered? As a human being who shouldn't be dismissed, humiliated, and fired based on assumptions about my intelligence and capabilities? "Mr. Thompson, I apologize. I made a mistake." "No." Marcus shook his head. "You made a choice. You made that choice with Carlos when you ignored his safety concerns. You made it with Jennifer when you dismissed her calculations. You made it with every worker of color on this site who you treated like they were inferior to you simply because they didn't look like you." The HR director stepped forward with a tablet. "Mr. Bentley, we've received 7 formal complaints about your conduct in the past 6 weeks. Racial discrimination, hostile work environment, safety violations. We've documented 13 separate incidents, including 3 you committed this morning while unaware of Mr. Thompson's presence." Bentley's face had shifted from pale to red. "Those complaints are exaggerated. Workers today are too sensitive. They don't understand that firm management isn't the same as discrimination." "Firm management?" Marcus's voice rose for the first time. "You told me to know my place. You said people like me were what's wrong with diversity programs. You questioned my education, my intelligence, my right to even have an opinion about safety on a site that I own." Around them, workers nodded. Murmured agreements rippled through the crowd. "You want to know what this is really about?" Marcus continued. "It's about every talented person who's been dismissed because of their skin color, every qualified worker who's been assumed incompetent, every brilliant mind that's been overlooked because someone like you couldn't see past their own prejudice." Bentley's professional mask cracked. "I have credentials from MIT. I've worked on projects across the country. I don't have to stand here and be accused of—" "Racism?" Marcus finished the sentence Bentley couldn't say. "That's exactly what you have to stand here and face. Because credentials don't excuse cruelty. Experience doesn't justify discrimination. And being good at your technical job doesn't give you permission to treat people as less than human." Roberto handed Marcus a folder. Inside were printouts of the morning's events, witness statements, photographs, recordings from site security cameras. "This is you." Marcus held up an image captured at 9:47 a.m. Bentley's face twisted in contempt as he pointed at Marcus. "This is the moment you told me I was fired. This is the moment you decided that your assumptions about who I was mattered more than finding out the truth." Bentley reached for the folder. "Mr. Thompson, please, I have a family. I need this job. I made a mistake, but I can change." "Can you?" Marcus's question hung in the air. "Because here's what I know about people who behave this way. It's never the first time, and if there are no consequences, it's never the last time." He turned to the gathered workers. "How many of you have experienced something like this, on this site or others? How many of you have stayed silent because you were afraid speaking up would cost you everything?" Slowly, hesitantly, then with increasing confidence, hands rose across the construction site. Black workers, Latino workers, women, immigrants, more than half the crew. Marcus looked back at Bentley. "You ask me if I went to college. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in civil engineering. But that's not why I deserve respect. Every person on this site deserves respect simply because they're human. And you, Mr. Bentley, just learned that lesson the hardest way possible." He nodded to Roberto. "Richard Bentley, you're terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the property."
The security team escorted Richard Bentley from the Riverside construction site at 10:34 a.m. He didn't go quietly. He protested, threatened legal action, invoked his credentials one final time as if a degree from MIT could shield him from the consequences of his choices. But the evidence was irrefutable. The witnesses were numerous, and most importantly, the person he'd tried to fire owned the company. Marcus watched him leave, feeling not triumph, but exhaustion. The kind of bone-deep weariness that came from having to prove your worth, your intelligence, your very right to exist in spaces that should have welcomed you from the start. "You okay?" Roberto approached quietly, his hand briefly touching Marcus's shoulder. "Yeah," Marcus managed a tired smile. "Just wondering how many times I've worked for people exactly like him. How many projects I've built where someone in management saw me the way he did." "The difference is now you're the one who decides." Roberto gestured toward the assembled workers. "You want to say something?" Marcus nodded. He walked to the center of the site where 47 construction workers waited. Some looked relieved, others appeared shaken. A few wiped tears from their eyes. "I want to be clear about something," Marcus began. "What happened this morning wasn't unique. Richard Bentley isn't some anomaly. He's a symptom of something much larger, a system that allows people to rise to positions of power while carrying prejudices that poison every interaction." He paused, making eye contact with workers across the site. "But here's what I also want you to know. You don't have to accept it. Not anymore. Not on my site. Not on any site. The Thompson-Vasquez Construction Employee Handbook has always prohibited discrimination, but, starting today, we're implementing new protocols, anonymous reporting that goes directly to ownership, mandatory bias training for all management, third-party audits of our workplace culture, and, most importantly, consequences, real, immediate consequences for anyone who creates a hostile environment." Carlos stepped forward. "Boss, can I say something?" Marcus nodded. "I've worked construction for 23 years, and I've put up with comments, with assumptions, with being treated like I'm less than because I thought that's just how it was, that speaking up meant losing my job and disappointing my family." He looked around at his fellow workers. "But watching you stand there this morning, taking that abuse, knowing you could have stopped it any second, but chose to experience what we experience every day, that changed something for me." Jennifer climbed down from her crane, adding her voice. "It showed us that someone at the top actually understands, actually gives a damn, not because it's good PR or because it's legally required, but because you've lived it. You know what it feels like to be dismissed, to have your expertise questioned, to be judged before you even open your mouth." Around the site, workers nodded, murmured agreement. Marcus felt the weight of their words. Leadership wasn't about authority or credentials or making the tough calls. It was about this, about creating spaces where people felt safe, valued, capable of reaching their full potential without fear. "I'm going to share something with you," Marcus said. "When I was 27 years old, I worked on a project in Dallas. The foreman, a white man about Richard Bentley's age, told me to stick to heavy lifting because engineering was too complicated for someone like me. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I had $30,000 in student loans, a pregnant wife, and no other job prospects." He paused, the memory sharp, even after 15 years. "That man was wrong about me, but his words still echo every time I walk into a meeting with investors, every time I submit a bid, every time someone looks surprised that I own a construction company. That's what racism does. It doesn't just affect the moment. It becomes a voice in your head questioning whether you belong, whether you're good enough, whether you deserve to be in the room." Marcus looked across the diverse faces of his workforce. "But here's what I learned. Those voices are liars. Every single person on this site has skills, knowledge, and experience that makes this project possible, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to work here." The HR director approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Thompson, we need to file the termination paperwork and document today's incidents for legal purposes." Marcus nodded, but before he turned away, he addressed the crew one final time. "We're behind schedule now. Losing a lead engineer mid-project is going to create complications, but I'd rather finish late with a crew that respects each other than finish on time in a toxic environment. Let's get back to work, and if anyone, and I mean anyone, experiences discrimination, harassment, or disrespect, you come directly to me or Roberto. No fear, no retaliation. I promise you that." The workers dispersed slowly, returning to their stations with a different energy. Something had shifted. A line had been drawn. Standards had been set. As Marcus walked toward the site office, he passed a young black apprentice who'd witnessed the entire confrontation. The kid couldn't have been more than 22, fresh out of trade school, still figuring out whether construction was where he belonged. "Mr. Thompson?" The apprentice's voice was hesitant. "Thank you for not backing down, for showing us that it's possible to stand up and not lose everything." Marcus stopped, looked at this young man who reminded him of himself 15 years ago. "It's more than possible," Marcus said. "It's necessary, because the only way things change is if we refuse to accept them as they are."